think we should start off this evening with a poem by Billy Collins. Billy Collins is a favorite poet of mine. He was the U.S. Poet Laureate for a number of terms, actually, more than one. And he wrote this poem called Introduction to Poetry. I asked them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into the poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. I love that. I feel like that was my high school experience to some degree. But that idea of poetry as a form in which we don't try to beat it to death to figure out a confession from it. There's an elegance to it and a way to explore it that is very different. And it may require a lot of different angles and a lot of different ways to come at something to fully understand and fully appreciate what it's saying. Like the idea of dropping a mouse to watch him probe his way out. There are a lot of ways through a piece of literature that's like a poem. If you're reading just prose, if you're just reading a paragraph of boring something or another, let's just say it out of your history book, that's trying to put you to sleep, the sentence structure, the form that's there, the number of words, the ordering of phrases, the rhythm and the rhyme, the pattern, the tempo isn't there, right? That's not the point. Whereas in something that's a poem or a literary device that's made that way, those parts exist for you to learn more information about what's written. A lot of time is taken to craft it the way it is. And we're going to find, I think, that hopefully we started finding that as we were going through our first assignment here. So, what's that?
Never liked poetry. And that poem there enforces that I don't like poetry.
There you go. All right. Don't like poetry. You would prefer to tie it to the chair and beat it with a hose.
No. Just don't make me read it.
You're going to read a lot of it because the Bible is mostly poetry. So whether you like it or not, that's what it is. That's the literary form that God spoke in.
As I listened to Genesis today a little bit and just tried to think a little bit, one of the things, and I think it kind of fits here, one of the things that came to mind is that I can look at the creation of God with all the freedom and happiness in the world. I can see how expansive it is and get lost in not understanding it. And here I am in faith. I don't have to explain it.
No.
I can just enjoy it.
Right. Which is really wonderful.
It really
You can
is
just
pretty,
enjoy it.
Pretty neat.
Okay. As we start off here, I want to remind us, this is like workshop day. At least I hope it's workshop day. We'll see how this goes. I wanted to remind us a few things that we covered last week because these are kind of some of the tools that we're going to utilize. In fact, even before we get to this one, when is this written? When is the creation account written down?
When Moses wrote it down.
We don't know for sure.
So when Moses wrote it down, at some point Moses writes down the creation account. Is that a little while after creation?
Yes.
It's a few weeks after creation at least, yes. We have been removed from creation. We're further down the line. And I don't want to get into all of this at the moment, but I do want to, every class I'm going to remind us of this, who it's written to, who the people are, and that it's written not in time like a history narrative of what's going on. There are some names of God that are reflected in Genesis chapter 1 that God says to Moses at the burning bush, this is my name. You have never called me by this name before. You don't know me by this name, but this is my name from now on. Well, how in the world does that end up in Genesis chapter 1? The most obvious, right? It ends up in Genesis chapter 1 because it's being written later. This is not a narrative that's historical of the name of God at this point. It's what God has got a bunch of attributes that he calls himself through his different names. And when he's using that portion of himself, when he's talking about that in himself, he will use that name in the narrative. And it's really beautiful. We'll start seeing more of that as we go. But the reminder at the moment is, like, this is written by Moses. They've come out of Egypt. They've got a journey to go on. And so we're going to remind ourselves of some of the different ways that the non-Greek ways of thinking, right? So non-Greek ways of thinking, words are express truth through pictures and stories. Numbers are both quantity, but they're symbolic. There's meaning behind numbers. They're not usually, sometimes they're merely a number, but very often they have some symbol behind them too. Eternal life is a life living in harmony with God now or in the future, whatever world you're in, wherever you are, that's eternal life. Community, there's a big focus on community, very important, not the individual, but the community. Sin is wrong behavior, it's what you do, not what you believe. The existence of God is just assumed. The Bible does not propose to prove God. That's not its point. The people who receive it, the people who read it, the people who wrote it, that's the assumption. God exists. He just is, right? It's not a theology book.
Well, no, Moses would have been talking to God. He would have had no reason to prove it to him.
Yeah.
He knew.
They're not needing to be proven that God exists. That's not a problem.
They see evidence of God, so there's no reason for him to have to prove it to them.
Yeah. When we see the descriptions of God, they focus on the nature of a relationship with his people. Faith in God has to do with experiences of God. There's not an attempt to rationalize things. They can hold paradox, two things that don't make any sense, they can hold them at the same time and go, yep, not a problem, right? Our Greek minds kind of get involved with that, and we're trying to rationalize two things very often. Truth is experiential. The scripture is about what was done and who did the doing, as opposed to how it was done. That would be more of a Greek way of thinking. And belief comes through experience. You eventually believe because you've experienced something. You've experienced a relationship. And truth unfolds over time. That allows then this, we could be at different parts of our growth along the way, and that's okay. Like we're just in different periods of understanding. We talked about how to counter the lullaby effect. So clearer minds of things that it's hard, right? But we had some other tools to try to help. Clearer minds of the previous meanings or the ways that we had read something before. Read carefully. We could read from a different version. I don't know if you guys know the what's called the Feynman way of solving problems. So Feynman is this great physicist. He was part of the Manhattan Project. Step 1, write down the problem. Step 2, think real hard. Step 3, write down the answer. Sometimes I feel like, this is as bad as that, right? Like how do you clear your mind of things that you've known before? And hopefully the other tools that we have will help us with that, which are, as we're reading, we're asking questions. Like, if I didn't know anything about this story, Esther's a really great one. I love doing it with Esther. If I didn't know anything about the story of Esther, and I'm reading along, and I stop right here, how does the rest of the story end? Like, what just makes sense for the rest of the story? How should it go? How should it end? Like, definitely not the way it ends. None of the things make any sense at all. Asking the question, what bothers us about the story? We talked about questions. We have big questions and small questions. Big questions are the ones if they're left unanswered, we don't really understand the story. And for our example, it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What's the point? Why did you put it there? If you don't already have knowledge of good and evil, how are you known to know not to eat from it? There's all kinds of problems with this big old tree. Small questions, no one dies from a small question. But you die from lots of small questions. Not you, but theories do. And in science, it isn't like one small question that killed the idea of the Earth being the center of the universe. It was lots and lots and lots and lots of small little questions along the way. And you're kind of like, well, none of those, like, when you got this many small questions and you're trying to have little answers to answer all of them, at some point you look at it and go like, that doesn't make any sense. It makes you question how the whole thing works. And so small questions are there to help us reevaluate our understanding so we can dig a little deeper. We talk about internal questions and external questions. We don't care about external questions so much. Like, you know, when you read Jonah, how did Jonah survive in the whale for 3 days? That's like, do you believe in miracles or not? That's an external question. It's assumed that miracles happen. Not an interesting question. What is an interesting question is, Jonah, why in the world do you think you could even run from God? That's an internal question. That's an interesting question. And so as we're reading through, we want to be trying to find what the questions are, in particular the internal questions. Usually there's a big one. Sometimes there's 2 big ones. And there's usually a lot of small ones along the way. And then we talked about some of these tools. We can ask questions like, which of these are not like the others? So this is a great tool, in fact, for Genesis chapter 1. Which of these days are not like the others? What's different and what's the same about them? We can play the game of what happens next. We can play the game of where have we heard these words before? We're going to play this game a whole lot after we get out of chapter 1. We're going to find that the words are said over and over and over again, like things constantly repeat themselves. Cast of characters was another one. All right, so Genesis chapter 1, 2 through 3. And the first thing I asked you to do in the homework that came out in the email was to read the first 2 verses and picture in your mind what you see. Picture in your mind what you see in the first 2 verses. Part of you might have been like, you saw that email and you're like, there's nothing. Like, God just created from nothing. That's what's in the first 2 verses, nothing. I'm going to read from what Alicia calls the backwards Bible. Because this is a version you probably haven't heard from. This is just the Hebrew Bible translated into English. So first 2 verses, and if you want to just like close your eyes and think, like what do you picture in your mind? In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. I guess I read into verse 3. I failed. Verse 2 though. In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters. So what do you picture?
I have an instant conflict.
Okay. Instant conflict. Conflict!
Because God is light, and He is going to be, there'll be no need for sun because God's light will light us. So, as God hovers over the darkness, why isn't it light?
Ah, okay.
Why does it need light? I guess my little peanut brain going to work.
Good question, right? I think that is.
Yeah, I thought of that too.
Okay. Hovering over the darkness, and I thought God was light. Okay, so maybe we'll kind of deconstruct that a little bit. This is where we're just talking, by the way. We're just kind of getting some ideas. What do we, just from those first 2 verses, what do we picture?
2, it says the earth was formless, that's what this one says. And we wanted to figure out what that word is.
Ah, that's a good question, figuring out what the formless word is. We're gonna talk about that,
But
because there are different ways to interpret that.
there was
word.
something there, and he.
Yes.
And he created the earth out of it then. Huh? Is that-
Yeah, this is what this is describing, right? I mean, often what we think of is
I
there's
thought
nothing.
He always thought he made it out of nothing.
Yeah, so this is the going back and reading carefully. What we read is there's a something that's formless, and he's hovering over the water of the deep. So that's a something, right? It's not a nothing. And we'll maybe talk about that more in a moment. But like right away, just in the first two verses, if we just stop and read a little more carefully, we're going to start seeing maybe why it's, well, in a moment, we're going to see maybe why it says that. Jan, I think you had a picture or an image in your mind.
Well, I was thinking that, I know it's gonna sound silly, but that God is like some kind of orb
Yeah,
floating over everything.
yeah.
And that's, I mean, but that doesn't make sense because it says, the earth was boundless. And he was hovering over the water, trying to think, now what do I do? I don't know.
Yeah, I love that thought. Like, and by the way, it's perfectly fine to think of an orb floating over. Like, this is like what comes to your mind when you hear the words, right? We don't have to be right. It's the wonderful thing about reading pictures as words is we're reading different pictures, but we're going to get a picture that's created. And he's hovering over something that's formless. Doesn't have a form to it. What is he going to do with this? What should we do with this thing?
Appears that there are two parts and we're focused on only one.
Okay.
Heavens and earth, and now all of a sudden we're talking about the earth and this water, deep water, dark zone, and my mind thinks, okay, is there something there already that's holding up this water, or is it just kind of floating around?
So this is the creation of the heavens and the earth, but I don't know that we have the heaven and the earth created yet. I think we just have this formless void. Something like to mold and work with of some sort.
So there's water floating around somewhere.
These
Yeah.
things are just floating
Just
around
there.
out in space. But space was there, I guess.
I could read something here, a note in this Bible,
Yeah, go ahead.
but this is strictly whoever wrote the Bible made this up. It's their opinion.
Sure, of course.
Hey, the earth was, the Hebrew text here has two rhyming words, and I'm reading somebody else's stuff.
Yep.
Two rhyming words, and I'm gonna say these all wrong. Tohu and bohu, which have similar meanings of wastedness and emptiness.
Yeah.
The construction is a figure of speech called I can't even say that, Indidus, whatever, I'm saying that terribly wrong, in which two words are used together to express the same idea. The meaning is that the earth had no clearly discernible features at this point in creation, but was essentially a mass of raw materials.
Yeah.
But he still says that God created that out of nothing.
Okay.
You were disagreeing with that.
Well, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that that's not where we start the story.
Okay.
And that's slightly different, right? Like we're just introduced to this is where we're beginning in our first two verses. And so let's now talk a little bit more about that. Go ahead, John.
Well, I just was wondering if, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Is there a time frame before the first day?
Yeah.
When he's doing other things?
Such a great observation.
Thousands of years or something?
Okay, yeah, so,
But at that time, we wouldn't even know what to call it.
okay,
The years, what weeks, when was it?
okay, great question. So Jan's noticing that as we're introduced here, we haven't he's created the heavens and the earth. Is it like they've been created and now we're going to see some more things happen? Or is it something different, right?
Or just-
Well, my opinion could be, many times they say something and then they go back and explain more
Okay.
detail. He makes a general statement, God created the heavens and the earth. Now he's gonna go and fill in some of the details
Some
of
of the
that. Now I
details.
could be wrong.
Okay, good.
Because in the first chapter, they make man and woman, but then they go back and they discuss more about making women later on. And it's just not redoing it, he's just more detail of what he did.
Yep. Yep. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I was thinking of the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the water and that. I'm trying to think of where else that is. Is that in the Noah story?
Oh, Michelle has already started to connect some stories together. Very clever of you. These almost exact same words will show up in the Noah story, which in some realms we will call the third creation. We will see why we call it that when we get there, but Michelle's playing the game of where have I heard these words before, even though she's like projecting ahead to text we haven't read yet.
Well, I didn't
But,
mean
yeah.
to, but that's just what
Yes.
my head went to.
And we will, when we get to the Noah story, we will come back to this because where did we hear these words before? Game plays very strongly in the Noah account and in the Genesis chapter 1 account. All right, so let's talk about the formless and void. Who has formless and void as the description in chapter 2?
Formless and void.
Yeah, so we've got a couple formless and voids. I have astonishingly empty. Does anybody have anything else?
Formless and empty.
Formless and empty.
Without shape, empty, and darkness.
Okay. My favorite definition so far is chaotic nothingness. I love that one. That's a Marty quote. Chaotic nothingness, and so just like that idea of nothing, but also it isn't together. It is like it's all mixed. It has no place where you would say that it has a form to it. It's just like blended together, like you stuck in the blender.
I was just thinking that God is a spirit. This may be the beginning of the physical universe right
Yeah.
here,
Right.
there, where time begins. You know,
Right.
we live in the dimension of 3 spatial dimensions and 1 of time.
Yeah.
At least we know that. And it may be that this is the beginning of all of that. Prior to that, it was just God is a spirit, and He's just now beginning this whole physical universe.
That's right. Before this universe, there isn't time, right? And we'll get to that when we talk more about the names of God.
What is the deep?
Oh, what is the deep? That's a great question. We've got some good questions, and I think we have an image in our head, and hopefully that's got us now primed for the next part, which is find your new best friend or friends, and talk about the things that you found this week that stood out. And I've got some things that I printed, so you can write on them or look at them, which are just the verses in 2 different versions, translations. So I'll go grab those, pass them out. But what I want us to do is just like kind of move on to this next part, which is really just talking through what did you see as you were going through, reading it afresh, what stood out. You can talk now. I guess I could have printed it with a bigger font. I should have done that. They're all yours. Yeah.
I'm sure you get them.
You guys should go back there and join T-Bone, see what he has to say. T-Bone's all like that.
What do you have to say? You have to say,
What do you want me to say?
what's your excuse?
Join Rogers. This is the part that would work better for the table set.
Who's got a computer? Who's got all the
Yeah, he's cheating. He's probably reading in Hebrew. Yeah.
Why do you have two different? And the way they did.
I'm just reading Hebrew with what is English. English is so cute enough.
Because I like the kind of most cases, but. Yeah.
You gave me 4 papers.
Yes.
Oh,
Two versions.
Oh, I see what
There's an NIV and a NASB. And for some reason I did.
I'm reading the version of that.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. It's okay.
One that I don't normally use, but they do a lot more explaining.
Oh, that was that.
Bob, I realize I printed these probably quite too small. Is that too tiny?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll print out larger ones for next week. I'm gonna print out really big. 1 letter per page, that'll be really hard to read.
So I kept it there, that's why I was
I
like.
couldn't put them together in the right order to spell. I was kind of saying, like, there's something there, but it's not in there. So you have to so it would be.
Notice in the first one, it says water has surface.
So it's not one block, but it has that form where it's,
It must have been in puddles or something.
I'm saying it's exactly.
Well, they don't even have really people yet.
When I see
I just think that it's the numbers
What
a day.
kinds of things did you see? I'm gonna grab my papers.
But that's what I said, you know,
What kinds of things did you see, Roger?
I thought it was kind of like.
without that,
I'll see verse 3. I just read that the light is
It's dark,
here
but he's
too.
light, so it could
It
be
doesn't
just
appear to be the light
There's
that's
no pretty discernible features at this point, but creating
which
with
because the sun appears to be free. At least that's the law.
Well, you know, just that dark.
Yes, it's not.
And then
Yeah, covered with water.
references to the evening and morning on various different days,
Cause I figured God.
and not necessarily a 24-hour calendar period.
He tries to summarize
Wasn't even, some of the word was even created to day 4.
Since you used to know later on.
That's just what came from, which is kind of what I'm always saying.
I don't know.
And then note about the waters above the heavens, might be referring to the clouds, because they just and so this whole process
puts me around. That makes me
because I didn't know anything else. It'll make more sense than just clouds.
No one, yeah, okay, no.
Versus the water
The bottom
next to the land.
happened, right? You try to force it on
I
everybody
always
else.
wondered when they
And
separated.
then there's the other,
Then you can come across.
the growth of the trees and the plants.
I always wondered what
Something
happened.
started with nothing.
Talked about growing within 1 day, which would seem like a 24-hour day, and so that didn't
Yeah, it was
seem
just like,
to make too much sense. So I'm sure it may be that
I always, yeah.
the day that's being referred to might be a 24-hour
I
day.
just don't see.
Maybe a period of time.
or separated, so would it be like?
I know, that's what I always wondered, even
But
as a
God was a
dad.
spirit. He can see everything as much, a lot better.
Yes.
You know, the rest of it is.
It's always very interesting.
I always wondered if it was. Okay.
Did you notice any difference as you were reading?
Yeah, I guess some
Muddy the water.
But you know, like when it.
Maybe verse 2,
Yeah.
form and void.
When you.
Not forget exactly
Water
what,
off.
not
Yeah, it's funny,
even
until it dries out.
some of the other wording.
It had to be around the edge.
And I just
Around the
did
edge.
But it kind of hard to
It really wasn't.
clarify his understanding of it. Because it seemed like this whole
Well,
thing was kind of
verse
like
5 when it says,
a nebulous mass.
Yeah, God
This
has
beginning
time.
time,
let there be no respect.
in which
Mine says
Yeah,
fall.
it says
there was
sacred
no
time.
light, no light in
That has to just be
Yeah, so does this. Yeah.
Besides, it's not very good.
Yeah.
And you can all see it.
But days and years.
Fall.
Again,
Yeah.
with
So
the
God made
himself,
let there be no
because that's just part of the physical world that we live in.
From what? So God made them fall
Physical nature.
and separated the water
Anyway, a lot of these thoughts
under
are
the
not
wall from the
coherent
water
in my
above it.
mind.
That's
It's just,
And it was so, and God called them vault to the sky.
Stood out as, that's an interesting question. I don't know.
That word for God is supposed to be, word for God is supposed to be whole. This is a whole term. That's what.
He was embedded in the artist head, but I'm sure there's some other things
So I met all three.
that I read
This of the water.
I can't
that it
separate the three,
separated the
but
waters from the
that, well, I guess the trees, the growth of the
Jesus
trees
used the
and
branches.
plants.
Jesus here about the
And
parents.
in the middle of it,
Described in terms of
Water that's
a
on
day, again, I'm sure it's probably
People
not.
can
it's
say.
right there in the
I know he
only
can do
place that
it.
kind of gives you the
No, it's interesting because even,
But,
even in language.
anyway, those are some things that seem kind of strange.
It does.
I got it. A lot going on in a relatively short period of time.
Yes.
So that's, kind of similar to the other days too, in terms of all the things going on. In our physical world, it seemed like it took time again, God can do it, in a 24-hour period if he really wanted to, whether or not that's really what it is.
introducing these songs.
But it's probably kind of describing, just major thoughts, themes, encapsulated in words.
Oh, and then in NIV, it doesn't say.
Major capitals, things that's going on. Somewhat similar within a given day, because you go the next day, it's different.
It is, it's like it's organized. Yeah, I like, you can use categories, right?
Anyway, those are just some of the thoughts.
ESV, it says, let there be lights in the expanse of the heaven to separate day from night, and let there be lights for seasons and for days and hours.
Like I say, I'm not really describing very well here. And as I thought, it wasn't necessarily all clear in my own mind. Some vague
Yeah.
thoughts.
But I mean, yeah, it just made more sense. He created it. Where's the lesser light and the stars?
It's the atmosphere, it's the water, and the atmosphere, even before it rains. And that's the sky.
South,
I don't
and one's the lower section of the
Yeah.
earth.
So you have water up there, and then you have the waters down here. But that's how I
Winter
picture that.
time. And in the winter time, he's,
So what is interesting though,
he's given the sunlight to the southern exposure.
But they have something on their own.
it's kind of seen as the verb.
Then it
Yes.
moves,
I always
north.
had to have the science book.
It's amazing how
That was not my
much
stuff.
longer or shorter the days are getting already.
Right.
As the sun is going south.
I remember one time we were in, but
Well,
they had that. And it was dark till after 10.
Salt.
Yeah.
I mean, it was.
All right. Let's, let's go ahead and see if we can compare some notes. I think there's, heard some good discussion. It worked. people were talking. That's good. You know, that's the start. And by the way, this is going to be a common occurrence for us to take something that we've read and we've maybe done a little work with throughout the week, and then come and compare it with other folks and see what notes compare. We're not getting out of Genesis chapter 1 for a little while. We're going to be here for a bit because there's a lot to kind of deconstruct. We're not going to do it all. We are going to spend some time on it, and we're going to we will keep coming back to the Genesis account because it keeps getting referred to a whole lot. So I'm going to just write some notes, some things that we've discovered. What are some things that were observed? Does anybody have something they want to share?
It was all good.
Okay, all good.
After everything he did, it was good. God.
In the NIV, it says, for the word vault, it says vault, between the waters and just vault. Where in the ESV, it's expanse.
Expanse versus vault, yeah.
Makes it, seems more, I could understand expanse in that scenario more than vault.
Yeah, so sometimes, and I passed out two versions. I passed out an NIV, which is more of a phrase translation, and a NASB 2020, which is more of a word translation. You'll see there are some real differences between them. You'll see some things that if you look real carefully, they're minor differences, but they're maybe important, maybe not. So sometimes the wording is difficult, and one thing that I would recommend that you do if you're kind of like struggling with the word, you want to kind of get some more context of that word, open up Blue Letter Bible, go and then like click into the Hebrew, like there's a tool thing on the side. You don't have to read the Hebrew, but you can look at the word and then get a definition that's maybe more expansive from a picture point of view of what that word might mean.
Blue Letter Bible is a website.
I'm sorry. Yes, blueletterbible.com. Thanks. What else? Oh, then I messed it up. Expanse versus what? What's the other? Vault. Okay, thanks. What'd you talk about?
We talked about this water idea.
Okay.
Obviously, it's pretty significant. It starts with God hovering over the water, and right toward the end there, T-Bone notes that the idea of water is a beginning idea.
Mm-hmm.
You help me out, I'm doing the problem. But it's a beginning idea, and you know, we look at it in terms of the birthing process
Mm-hmm.
that is in water. So kind of a significant thing in the Hebrew water, what's with all the water thing, you know?
Oh my goodness, you just hit on so many things.
Well,
I can't even wait.
Then let me go a little farther, because I was worried about this afternoon. This expanse, or this vault,
Mm-hmm.
is there to separate water from water.
Ah, yeah.
Now, I know what the water on the earth is, at least I think I do. I can see it when I go, you know, to Fort Bragg and a few other places out there. There's a lot of water there. What about this water above this expanse?
That's a mist.
Could we go searching and find tons and tons of water somewhere out in the heavens?
Okay, all right, good question. Great questions.
A lot of water up in the clouds.
Okay. What, and, no, I'm gonna stay away from it for now. The idea of it started with water and birthing. You don't have to use your imagination too much to see this everywhere. I'll even give you one close hint. Who is this being written to? Where?
It's coming out of Egypt.
Coming out of Egypt, how did they come?
Through the Red Sea.
Yeah, through the parted sea, which is a birthing of the nation. And I will just give you a hint. It shows up in the New Testament when Jesus talks very strongly. We will get to that later. But like the unlocking of just understanding that little portion right there is going to unlock all kinds of imagery that we see over and over again. That's very important to our Christian beliefs. So yeah. Okay. Anything else? I'm sure there's lots of other things. Roger, did you want to share any of yours?
Oh, well, I forget what they are now. It's somewhat been described, well, the initial light at the very beginning that God created. I'm not sure that was necessarily the sun, because it is described in a later day where the sun was even created.
All right, so we have the initial light is before the creation of the sun. You talked about this refrain of evening and morning.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's interesting.
Yeah. It wasn't necessarily a 24-hour day, especially because the first days are even before the sun was created.
Okay, yeah, so we got
That kind of defines the 24.
sun later, we've got who knows what time is. But this idea of, like, how many of you think of a day as evening, morning? Yeah, like, that's not how we talk, right? That's not how we talk. We know, though, that's how a Jewish calendar works, right? At sundown is the beginning of Sabbath, right? It begins at sundown. So there's a significance there. We'll talk about that.
My question is, why does it seem that the Spirit's doing all the work?
Okay, there's a question here. Why does it seem the Spirit is doing all the work?
Seems like I read the New Testament is Jesus did everything. Nothing was made without ever by him.
Okay. All right. I think, I know, this was the other one. Roger shared some things with me, and I wrote them down as he was sharing them. He mentioned that things seem to be in categories. Created in categories. It's not like, somehow things are related that seem to be in the day.
Mine kind of goes along with that. Like the first 3 days have to do with like separating things or organizing things.
All right.
And then the fifth and sixth, or maybe it's the 2 days. The fifth and sixth have to do with, or maybe it's even the fourth, with filling. But what I really like is like day 2, he creates separates the water, so you have the air and the water. And then I'm gonna mess all this up. On day 5, he fills it up with fish and birds. And then on day 3, he creates the earth and the vegetation. And then on day 6, he fills it up with animals.
No way. Are you saying that, like, the first half is separating things and the second half is filling things?
Yeah, but then in the middle.
And the days somehow relate to each other? Like,
Yes.
what got separated is what gets filled
Yeah.
in the second half on the matching day?
Yes, you've
Whoa.
heard this before because I was so excited.
That is a really interesting literary structure there, isn't it? What do we call that?
That's a chiasm.
It is a chiasm. That
And
is.
then in the middle,
Bing, 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 bing. There is a chiasm
If he created the
here.
animals before he put plants, they wouldn't have lived very long.
Well, that's your Greek mind thinking suddenly, but yes.
No, that was just common sense there, sorry.
in the middle, he creates
It's only one
time.
day, they can fast for a day. Sorry, in the middle, yes.
He seems to create time.
Oh,
But the thing that caught my attention the most is like in all this you have, he's putting the sun and the moon and the stars. And then he's talking about for days and years and signs and festivals. And all of a sudden this festival word, like in the middle of all this, is really odd to me.
Because it's Moses, right, to the Jewish people.
Right,
Telling them when their festivals are.
right. But it's like, it's the only place where something like that shows up in all this. It's
Okay.
like all of a sudden you're brought to
it brings you
Like
to
this
it
is-
now.
this people.
All right. So, yes, verse 14, God said, let there be luminaries in the firmament of the heaven to separate between the day and the night, and they shall serve as signs and for festivals and for your days and years, and they shall serve as luminaries in the firmament of heaven to shine upon the earth. Like that idea, he put those there for a reason. It looks like he created time when he put them there. We now have time. And he put them there in order to mark festivals. He hasn't even created man yet, but he put them there to mark festivals and seasons. They exist for a reason. It's not just like twinkly things in the sky. Like they're there for a purpose, and the purpose seems important. Okay, cool. Any others?
That's fun.
I had one other thought.
Okay.
You've done hearing for me, that's fine.
Nope.
And when he creates man, and I forgot where this is, he tells them to rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky. Like he tells them to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth and subdue it. He's like telling them to care for his creation. Like he's put man here on this thing that he's created, and he's telling them, okay, like take care of it. And I just think that's something we've forgotten. I've forgotten.
Yeah.
Didn't really read that in it before.
Like that was the purpose that he was given, right? Like this is the thing you're going to do in this first creation story. You're going to take care of this creation that has been made. All right.
But he's given everything that he creates, he's given the ability to create.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
to bear fruit.
So everything that he's created has been given the ability to create.
And that's
And-
why things have seeds.
and there will be like creation there are two words that are being played in here. We haven't really talked about the two Hebrew words yet, but like there are different words being used. One is form out of something. The other is like creating out of nothing. And so we'll dig into that a little bit more. But there's a creation and a creative ability, and T-Bone has talked about this before, I think in one of his sermons, that God has given us that is like God's. That's different than just what like plants and animals create. It's like a creativity to be able to create in a manner like God does. That's why we have buildings. That's why we have things that we put together and make. Maybe Roger knows. Roger, do you remember like the laws of thermodynamics?
Yes, I've forgotten.
but I brought back that horrible memory. So the laws of thermodynamics, basically, like the theories of chaos, say that energy, if it's just left at rest, what happens if you open up the windows and you have the air conditioner running? Or maybe the air conditioner's not running. It's nice and cool inside here. We open up the windows and it's 100 degrees outside. What happens? It's going to get warm in here. In fact, what happens is like it becomes equal, right? The energy disperses and everything becomes equal. Over time, things just become the same. That's what happens. So it requires something to take things that are formless and void and without any form or chaotic nothingness, and then to create form by separating them and dividing them and saying the light is going to stay here and the darkness is going to stay here and the waters are over here and the land is here. And if left to their own devices over time, they just all come back together again as formless, void mush. That's the laws of physics. It's the laws that God has set up. And in one thought, the reason that things stay together is because God keeps them together. That's what he's doing. He's making sure that things stay separate and have form as opposed to a big mush pile. be awful to live in. Okay, what I'd like you to do is take the things that you've kind of maybe talked to your friend about, or your enemy, however it worked out, and go home and think about them a little bit more. Go back through, reread again. I give you 2 different versions, and I'm going to leave this for you just as a little challenge. At the end of each day, it has a saying. So what does it say inside of, Jan, what does it say inside of your version?
It's the same as this one, and it was good. It also was good. Is that right? Is that what, do I misunderstand?
You can't be wrong, because that's what yours says. No, you're good. And then it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, and then what does it say?
That was the first day, and you can't have daytime at night.
So evening and morning, and then what does yours say, Jan?
Well, the second day and the third day. Is that what
Okay.
you mean?
Uh-huh. The second day, the third day.
First day, second day, third day.
Does anybody else say something else?
Mine goes back to the second day and thank God saw that it was good.
Okay.
Sometimes it says the day or thank God saw it was good.
Okay.
So it's one of those.
All right.
And NASB has 1 day, second day, a third day. a
All
fourth
right.
day.
So you have 2 versions. One is the NIV. It says the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day. When you go look at the NASB version, it's going to say a second day, a third day, a fourth day, a fifth day, the sixth day. Which, by the way, matches the Hebrew. This is sometimes why a word translation is a little more helpful if that ends up being important. And so in your thoughts throughout the week, as you're just kind of looking a little more deeply and seeing what you haven't seen before, ask yourself the question, is there an important difference between talking about a day and the day? That might be kind of fun. It may not be fun too, but. All right. Cool.
So that was the final day.
I'm going to leave one more question too, actually. 2 questions. Oh, the 7th day too will be called out as the 7th day. Yeah.
But he rested that day.
He did. Yeah, that's going to be important. So I guess 2 more things. Michelle has pointed out that there is dividing that happens, separating that happens in the first part, and filling that happens in the second. There are some other things that will lead us to see that there are things that are happening in the first part and things that are happening in the second part. Maybe pay attention and see if you can find some of those. Some of them are easier to find than others for certain. But there is a chiasm. The first bit there is a chiasm. And see if you can find then what would be the center of the chiasm. So that's one part. And then the other thing that I wanted you to think about this week is, why does it say evening and morning?
That's
Why
what
is
I've
it-
always wondered.
Why it should be a really great question, right?
Yes.
I get my day started in the morning when I wake up. That's when my day starts. But it looks like God is saying day starts, evening, morning, we have a day. So think about, why would evening, morning be a day? All right, there we go.
You're the teacher, you're supposed to tell us what that is.
No, I'm the one who's going to ask the questions and have you
This is
think
not
about
a
them.
Greek class, this is a Greek class, not a Hebrew class. You tell us.
Not a Greek class, sorry. We're not doing Greek right now. We'll do Greek later.